Deborah Kerr's story didn't start with Hollywood lights. It started in a small Scottish town in 1921 with a little girl named Deborah Jane Trimmer. Nothing about her childhood screamed future icon. She wasn't born into fame or wealth, but even as a child, she carried herself differently, quiet, graceful, almost untouchable. People around her noticed it. She wasn't just pretty, she had presence. At first, everyone thought she'd become a ballerina. Hey, if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, don't forget to click subscribe. It's completely free, and this way you won't miss any of our next stories from the stars you grew up with. She trained hard, dreamed big, and poured herself into dance. But fate had other plans. After a while, her teachers noticed something unusual. She wasn't just good at movement, she was magnetic when she performed. Her emotions reached people. That's when she switched paths and went all in on acting. And here's where it gets crazy. While most actresses spent years clawing their way into the spotlight, Deborah stepped into a war-torn Britain during World War II and still managed to get noticed. Directors saw something rare, a woman who was beautiful, yes, but who also had the intelligence and depth to bring characters to life. By the early 1940s, she was already starring in films like Major Barbara and Colonel Blimp. These weren't just roles, they were proof that Deborah Kerr was different. She wasn't the type to be trapped in one role, one image, or one stereotype. While others were typecast as the pretty girl or the quiet wife, Deborah showed she could play sensitive heroines, tough women, even morally complicated characters. She wasn't afraid of depth, and that terrified Hollywood. Because here was the truth. Deborah Kerr wasn't gonna fit into a box. She was gonna build her own. By the late 1940s, Hollywood couldn't ignore her anymore. MGM, the powerhouse of American cinema, brought her over, and suddenly, Deborah Kerr was no longer the quiet Scottish actress. She was the face of elegance, sophistication, and power in a woman's body. Audiences adored her. Studios sold her as the perfect English rose, untouchable, graceful, flawless. But here's where it gets shocking. Deborah was never content with just being the ladylike star. She wanted more. She wanted danger. And she proved it in film after film. In Black Narcissus, 1947, she played a nun battling forbidden desire, a role so intense that critics still call it one of the boldest performances of its time. Deborah wasn't afraid to walk the line between purity and scandal. She leaned into it. But the moment that would burn her into Hollywood history came in 1953 with From Here to Eternity. For the first time, audiences saw Deborah Kerr break her perfect image. She wasn't the polished English lady anymore. She was raw, passionate, daring, and her partner in that infamous beach scene, none other than Burt Lancaster. The kiss in the waves wasn't just a movie moment, it was explosive. It was dangerous. It shattered every expectation audiences had of her and launched one of the most scandalous Hollywood stories of the decade. But here's what people didn't know. Behind the scenes, Deborah was being pushed harder than ever. Burt Lancaster wasn't easy. He was forceful, demanding, and relentless. And Deborah, the actress who had spent years playing it cool, found herself caught in a storm she couldn't control. Hollywood sold the scene as romance. Deborah later revealed the truth. It was exhausting, overwhelming, even suffocating, but it was also unforgettable. The scene, the chemistry, and the man she would one day expose. Everyone knows the scene. The beach, the waves crashing. Deborah Kerr and Burt Lancaster locked in a kiss so raw, so forbidden, it was banned from some theaters at the time. That single moment in From Here to Eternity became one of the most iconic images in film history. The kind of thing you see once and never forget. But here's the part the public never saw. Deborah later admitted that filming it wasn't romantic at all. It was brutal. The water was freezing, the waves were stronger than expected, and the sand was everywhere. In their clothes, in their hair, sticking to their faces. She said at times she could barely breathe as Lancaster kept demanding more takes. Burt insisted we go again and again until he was satisfied. I was exhausted. I thought I was drowning. Think about that. The scene Hollywood sold as pure passion was, in reality, a test of endurance. Kerr wasn't just fighting against the ocean. She was fighting against Lancaster's relentless drive for perfection. And yet, when the cameras rolled, something magical happened. The raw chemistry between them burst onto the screen. That kiss didn't just challenge Hollywood's rules, it destroyed them. It turned Deborah Kerr, the proper lady, into a bold symbol of passion and risk. But behind the magic, a storm was brewing. Because working with Burt Lancaster wasn't just difficult, it was dangerous. For decades, Deborah Kerr kept her opinions to herself. She was known as Hollywood's lady, graceful, private, never stirring controversy. But later in life, she broke her silence, and what she revealed about Burt Lancaster left fans speechless. Burt was brash, forceful. He filled a room with his presence, but he could also suffocate it. She admitted that his energy was magnetic. He could inspire. He could light up an entire set. But that same power could crush anyone who got in his way. He wasn't just passionate, he was controlling, unpredictable, even ruthless. Kerr confessed that working with him often felt like a battle. One minute he'd draw out the best in her, the next he'd push her so far she wanted to walk away. He demanded control over everything, signing the set, the mood, even his co-stars. And the shocking part, she admitted she could never fully trust him. People adored him. But there was another side. One the public never saw. You always had to be on guard with Burt. That wasn't Hollywood gossip. That was Deborah Kerr, the woman who stood beside him on screen, finally telling the world the truth. And yet, in the same breath, she admitted something almost scandalous. Without Burt, she might never have broken free from her proper English lady image. He forced her into risks she never would have taken. He made her daring. And while she could never trust him, she could never forget him either. That's the paradox of Burt Lancaster, the man who made her shine brighter, but also cast the darkest shadow over her career. After From Here to Eternity, Deborah Kerr was no longer Hollywood's polite English rose. That beach scene had shattered her image, and she knew it. For the first time, directors saw her not as the perfect wife or the quiet lady, but as a woman capable of fire, passion, even danger. It was liberating, but it was also costly. Once the industry decided she could play daring, they pushed her harder. Roles in Tea and Sympathy and Heaven. Knows Mr. Allison forced her to tackle taboo subjects, social prejudice, forbidden relationships, even raw survival in wartime. She gave everything to her work, and audiences loved her for it. But at home, things were falling apart. Her first marriage to Anthony Bartley, a decorated World War II fighter pilot, had started like a fairy tale. The war hero and the rising star. 2 daughters. A glamorous life that seemed perfect on the outside. But Bartley couldn't handle it. Deborah's fame, her financial independence, her constant travel, it ate at him. He was the hero in the air, but at home, she was the star, and he couldn't stand being second. The marriage crumbled under jealousy and distance. After nearly 14 years, Deborah walked away, leaving behind not just a marriage, but the dream of happily ever after. It was a brutal reminder that the woman who looked perfect on screen was living a life full of cracks behind the camera. A year after the divorce, Deborah shocked everyone again. She remarried. This time to Peter Viertel, an American-born novelist and screenwriter. Unlike Bartley, Viertel wasn't intimidated by her success. He was already part of Hollywood's inner circle, a man who knew its power games and played them well. With him, Deborah found something closer to stability. But this wasn't a simple love story. Viertel came with a daughter, Christine, and Deborah stepped into the complicated role of stepmother while balancing her own children. Her family life became a patchwork of blood ties, in-laws, and Hollywood connections, and then came the shrapnel legacy. Deborah's daughter, Francesca, married actor John Shrapnel, tying the family even deeper into Britain's acting royalty. Their sons, Lex and Tom, both actors, and Joe, a screenwriter, carried Deborah's artistic DNA into the next generation. The Kerr legacy wasn't just surviving, it was multiplying. But even as her family thrived, Deborah herself was still walking a tightrope. Her second marriage lasted nearly 5 decades, yes, but Peter Viertel wasn't always by her side. He lived much of the time in Spain, while Deborah eventually returned to Britain to be near her daughters. They were married, but apart, a love defined as much by distance as by loyalty. It was quieter than her first marriage, less scandalous but no less complicated. And just like with Burt Lancaster, Deborah discovered something unsettling. The men in her life always came with shadows. For decades, Deborah Kerr was the picture of grace, elegance on screen, dignity off it. But time is cruel, even to legends. After conquering Hollywood, she retreated to Europe, splitting her days between the snow-capped peace of Switzerland and the glittering coast of Marbella, Spain. On the surface, it looked like the perfect retirement, villas, luxury, an escape from the constant flashbulbs of Hollywood. But behind closed doors, things were different. Her health began to betray her. Parkinson's disease, a thief of control, slowly stripped away the elegance that had defined her for so long. The woman who once commanded audiences with a single glance now struggled with the simplest movements. For someone who had built a life on discipline, poise, and perfection, it was devastating. And yet, even as her body weakened, her spirit never collapsed. Friends said she faced her illness with the same quiet strength she brought to her roles. No public breakdowns, no pity tours, just quiet courage. Deborah Kerr lived and declined with the same dignity that made her unforgettable on screen. By 2007, the end was near. She returned to Britain, to a small village in Suffolk, not to hide, but to be close to her daughters and grandchildren. After a life lived in spotlights and stormy seas, she chose to finish her story in peace. On October 16, 2007, Deborah Kerr, the woman who had redefined grace in Hollywood, was gone. She was 86 years old, but Hollywood's drama wasn't finished with her yet. Just 3 weeks later, another death rocked the family. Peter Viertel, Deborah's husband of nearly 50 years, died of cancer. Think about that. Nearly half a century together, and they couldn't even survive a month apart. It was as if their story was written for the screen. The actress who had spent her life portraying epic romances, and the writer who had spent his life crafting them, left the world almost hand in hand. People who knew them said it was heartbreaking, but also strangely poetic. Deborah and Peter's marriage hadn't been perfect. They had distance, they had struggles, they lived much of their later years apart. But at the end, their bond was undeniable. Neither lasted long without the other. Together, they left behind a legacy not just of films and novels, but of family. Daughters, grandchildren, actors, writers, all carrying the Kerr Viertel story into the future. And maybe that's the greatest twist of all. Deborah Kerr, the woman who exposed Burt Lancaster, the actress who risked everything to shatter her own image, the star who never won an Oscar until Hollywood finally admitted its mistake, wasn't just a legend of the screen. She was proof that behind every Hollywood myth is a human being, fragile, daring, complicated, and unforgettable.